I am Liz O'Sullivan. I'm an independent specifications consultant in sunny Denver, Colorado. I'm a licensed architect here in Colorado. I used to work as an architect at a small design-oriented firm, and now all my work is independent specifications consulting. All my clients are other Colorado architects. So what I do for them is divisions 0 through 14. And here's some of that housekeeping stuff that Joy mentioned. Pound Trust CSI is the hashtag. And my Twitter handle is @LizO'SullivanAIA. So I have 8 things that I think product representatives should know about what's inside my head. So how are specification decisions made? Well, the specifier is not always the decider. Often the owner has requirements, and they convey those requirements in various ways. Some of the public school districts that I work for have what we call a tech spec, and they give it to the architect who gives it to me, and this document has different manufacturers and products listed that are their requirements. Other owners have manufacturer preferences that they direct the architect to list in the spec in some other manner, and owners vary in sophistication, so sometimes this is a haphazard process. Sometimes it comes out late in the project. You never know when you're going to be told by an owner what to use when. So sometimes the architect decides based on aesthetic concerns. For example, one manufacturer's specific glazing product might be selected because of the specific tint that the architect likes. It goes well with other exterior elements of the building. So in that case, it's probably based on color more than performance. But that's what we have to use. So when neither the architect nor the owner has a preference, the specifier decides. How does a specifier decide? Well, you never know. No, I look at the drawings. I ask questions of the architect when necessary. If the architect has no preference, and if we've already determined that the owner has no preference, then I specify products that go with the drawings, or at least do not conflict with the drawings. So when I am selecting products or manufacturers, I start with what I know. And if I don't know, then I start with what's in my commercial master that I use, which is ARCOM's master spec. Sometimes I stop there. Sometimes master spec gives me enough products to choose from that I'm familiar enough with, and I'm done. I have my products in my spec. Sometimes it's not enough. Some other resources that I use are forspecs.com, which has a listing of various products, and sometimes I default to Google. But in this process of figuring out what's going to work for the project, I might call or email a product rep to figure out if it's an appropriate product for the project. So if you get a call from a specifier, it would be good for you to know what we're like. Most of you have probably met various specifiers, and we're all different, but in many ways we are very similar. We're all skeptics. We're not likely to just accept what you tell us. We want to be able to do our own research. this is why we prefer to see things in print published and easily accessible on the web. We are detail-oriented and generally only interested in technical information. Of course, aesthetics are important to our clients, the architect, and aesthetics are important to me. I'm an architect too, even though technical work is all I do now. But I don't need information from you about the aesthetics of your product. I already know that by looking at it. Most of us, almost 99% of us, are introverted. And one characteristic of an introvert is that often we prefer to write than talk. So email is easy for us, and sometimes the phone is difficult.
Well, before you go any further, Liz, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
How often do you think you're the one who's making the decision on the product?
That's a good question. Products that nobody sees, such as waterproofing or vapor barriers, I'm usually the decider. Products that everyone sees, such as brick, I'm not the person who makes the selection. That's usually the architect or the owner. Interior finishes, I never select. The architect picks that or an interior designer picks that because that's the stuff that gets shown to the owner. This is the fun part for the owner, the interior finishes. So in cases in which I would list products for interior finishes include publicly bid products where we're required to have more than one manufacturer listed. And in that case, I end up doing some research on products to figure out some comparable products that have the same performance as the specified product. Does that?
Now, when you go through that process, it's going to be something that's interior, but you still need to specify it. You still need to put it in the documents, even though they're deciding, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So how does that work?
That's a good question too. If it's a private owner and the interior designer has picked one product and has shown it to the owner has bought off on it, signed off on it, I don't even list other manufacturers. And sometimes I don't even list performance characteristics in the specification. For things like carpet, I usually just say product indicated on the drawings, and then I just list the installation requirements in the specification section. If it's a product such as resilient tile or luxury vinyl flooring, luxury vinyl tile, then if I'm listing a comparable product, I will put performance requirements in the specification and list manufacturers who have products that meet those performance requirements, those characteristics. Mm-hmm. So when I'm talking with you or on the phone, what I want from a product representative is what I can't find online. So if there is an answer out there on the website and I just couldn't find it, it's not because I'm lazy, it's because there's probably something goofy about your website. So, and you might want to talk to your manufacturers, whoever controls the website. If there's something basic on the website and I have to call you to find it, then it's not me, it's the website. So guide me to the answer that's on the website, but it's probably not out there. So I want you to know what it is that I'm seeking. So sometimes it's a compatibility issue that I call about. I'll call a product representative or a manufacturer's technical helpline and ask if a particular product is compatible with any paint at all. Can this product be painted? what product do you recommend for coating it? I've had 2 of those situations lately, one where an interior designer selected a product to use as a base that's not actually intended to be a finished product, and she wanted it painted. So I had to call the manufacturer of the base to see if it was compatible with any paint and what would adhere best. Did they have any recommendations? And then a duct covering that can be wetted and then molded to shape the duct and then painted. And the intention is that it's painted. That's what it's for. But the manufacturer wouldn't recommend a paint. So that's the kind of information that I'm usually seeking when I call you. Something about how this product, your product, interacts with another product on the project. And if you don't know, I want you to know who to ask. And you can get back to me, or you can forward me to that other person. So I prefer to do my own research, but it's not all out there, and that's why we need you, product representatives. So for me, it's easiest to reach out to people that I know. So if I've met a product rep at a CSI meeting or a CSI convention or at an AIA presentation or something like that, then I already know this person. It's easy for me to reach out and email or even to call, even for me who hates the telephone. So if you get to know me, I'm more likely to call you. That doesn't mean I'm more likely to specify your products. It just means that when I have a question about your products, it's easier for me to reach out to you because I know I'm going to get something. I know what I'm dealing with. And
well, that's interesting though, Liz, because we constantly tell product representatives to build relationships as if sometimes it sounds like if you make friends with me, you'll be able to specify it. What do you think the real advantage to having that relationship is from your perspective?
Well, the real advantage is I know about you, so I know about your products. They may not be appropriate for any of my projects, but someday I'm probably going to have a project that your products are appropriate for, or a project that someone else has. You know, specifiers talk to each other. Actually, we write at each other. We're pretty involved in LinkedIn groups, and for specs.com, that website I mentioned earlier, it's for specs.com. It has a discussion forum on it that is heavily used by specifiers all over the country. And sometimes people ask questions. Sometimes people who are not specifiers ask questions on this forum, and a handful of specifiers will step up and answer the question. So if you represent a product that I'm never going to use, chances are I know somebody who might need it. So that's one benefit of building relationships. Another benefit is that the more people know, the more that architects and specifiers know what you as a product rep have to offer, the more we can take advantage of what you have to offer, the more you can help us. So when your product is appropriate for our project, you can have a much bigger impact if you already have a relationship with us than if you don't. I'm more likely to get a product rep that I know involved early on a project just because it's easier for me to reach out to someone I've already met. So, and then, you know, the earlier you get involved in a project, the more you can help. You're not cleaning up a mess at the end of construction documentation. You're guiding the design team in the right direction.
You've got a couple questions stacking up here, Liz.
Okay.
Okay. I'm going to start here. If an owner, architect, or designer chooses a product that has a poorly written specification, what does the specifier do? And I think they're referring to guide specs there.
Yeah. Well, Guide specs are a good topic. And I am going to address guide specs later, but I do want to touch on this right now. It's frustrating. Poorly written guide specs are certainly frustrating, but you should know that a lot of specifiers don't just grab a guide spec and pop it into the project manual as is. We pull bits of information out of that guide spec. So sometimes I see guide specs in which none of the information that I need is actually there. So that's a really poorly written guide spec. And that happens, but I just deal with it. I get frustrated. I throw pens around my office, things like that.
I can actually picture you doing that. One of the other questions you've got here. She has mentioned master spec. I know that there is also spec link. My question is, do you find these resources a good thing? Should the product rep get you to change the master spec, or does this stuff matter really? That's a big confusing question, isn't it?
Yeah, I think I know what it's asking though. I use master spec masters as my office masters because I have various clients with various project types. So there are only a few specification sections for which I have written my own masters, and they started from a master spec master. So joint sealants, I have my own master, and penetration fire stopping, I have my own master, and it started with a master spec master that I then edited with options to be for the way that I use that section. But everything else I grab straight from the box. And I often encourage product representatives to try to get their products listed in master spec. And it's kind of a tedious process. But so my masters are, you know, from the box. Of course, I add manufacturers to the manufacturers that are listed in master spec. Sometimes master spec doesn't include all the manufacturers I want to use. They don't include some regional manufacturers, things like that. So if you talk about changing my master, I don't really have an office master that is the Bible that cannot be changed because I have so many different architect clients and they have various owner clients. So that's just how I work. That's how my firm is set up. But I'll often add a different manufacturer to the specification when it's appropriate for the project.
Well, Jarrett Davis just wants to thank you for taking the time to step up and speak today rather than writing closed captioning at the bottom. Jarrett may know you have a sense of humor. And we have a question here. What is the best way to get into a master spec when you are new on the scene? And I don't know if he means I'm a new rep in town or I'm repping a new product.
Oh. Boy, you know, every firm is different. Every specifier is different. Some definitely only write closed specs and only list 3 manufacturers and have no desire to vary. I don't know what to tell you except to try to get into the office and do a presentation about your product. And I will address presentations in a few minutes.
Okay.
Okay. So if you're dealing with just a specifier, I'm not talking about the whole office. I will talk about a whole architectural office in a minute. But if you're dealing with just a specifier, most of us are not after a free lunch. We don't need continuing ed credits. We just need technical information. So as I mentioned before, we want you to know about the technical aspects of your products. And as specifiers and architects, we don't buy anything, so we don't want salespeople, and a salesperson kind of approach can be kind of a turnoff. We want technical product representatives, and that's how I think you should present yourselves, and that's what you are. I mean, that's one of your functions. So put that hat on when you go to talk to architects and specifiers. Don't put on a salesperson hat on those days. So if you do get into an architect's office to make a presentation to let them know about your products, here are some of the things you should keep in mind. If you can, choose your audience wisely. So what I mean by that is spend more time with people that you think are interested in what you have to offer, and spend less time with firms where everyone seems to be looking for nothing but a free lunch. So I personally work best with clients who are more technically oriented and understand what I do, or even if they're not technically oriented, they at least understand the importance of the work that I do. So if you spend your precious time focusing on firms that listen to you and ask questions, and maybe firms that have used your products before, something like that, you can really have a better impact on those firms than on the firms where if you represent insulation and you go do a lunch presentation for the office and all you get is interior designers, there's something wrong. You've experimented, it didn't go well, you spend a lot of money on buying people lunch, and they weren't the people who are going to make any decisions about insulation. So that's, half the battle might be choosing your audience wisely. So assume that the audience knows nothing, because there are going to be young people in the audience, people who have graduated from architecture school but literally know nothing about how architecture in the real world is practiced. So even some people who've been practicing for a long time may know nothing about your products. So start at a very basic level so that you can bring everyone up to the same level of education about your products. So if you use acronyms, I don't care what the acronym is, just make sure you define it, because I've been in presentations where someone used an acronym and I didn't know what it was, and it wasn't a good time to ask, and I learned what it was 3 days later, and I was like, oh, why didn't he just say that? So if your product has a bad reputation from something in the past or something like that, be aware of it, know how to address questions that come up about that history of your product.
Liz, you have a couple of questions coming in.
Okay.
One of these has come from Twitter. They're asking, how often do you use Green Wizard, or it's HBN Pharos, I think you know what I mean by Pharos, to find lead-ready products? So are you searching specific databases like that?
Sometimes I do. I have not had many lead projects in the last few years, and the projects that I have had that started out as lead turned out not to be lead, and I kept pressing my architect client to let me know, are we doing lead or are we not doing lead, because I have an additional fee if we do lead, and that kicks in as soon as we start construction documents. I need to know now before I do all this research. So I have a lead project coming up on which I'm going to have to do research, and I haven't done it in a long time, so I'm not sure where I'm going to start. But Green Wizard is something I've heard of, but I'm not familiar with it. So At this time, no, I'm not using any specific databases.
And then we have a question from an extremely polite Claire who writes, Ms. O'Sullivan, do you have an opinion on BSD SpecLink versus Master Spec? Thank you.
I know a number of specifiers who use SpecLink and absolutely love it. I've never used it. What I have heard is that big firms where they use SpecLink also have a Master Spec subscription for the content. The content of Master Spec is apparently more robust than the content of SpecLink, and I need more robust content, and I'm an independent. I can't afford two master specification software programs, so I just have one. And Master Spec is just what I started with. It works well for me, so that's why I use it. And other people have used both and prefer SpecLink. Some people use both and prefer Master Spec.
And I'm going to mention here that you mentioned earlier LinkedIn and ForSpecs. If you're looking for opinions like that from specifiers, you're welcome to post questions in those arenas about those topics. I just sent out to everyone on this call that you can find our LinkedIn group, and that's exactly the kind of thing our people, they're happy to answer that kind of question, as well as the lead question, are you using Green Wizard, are you using Pharos, that kind of thing. Although I tell you that if you start a debate about lead versus green globes, what happens is your own fault. Another question, this is another question. Another question, our firm includes spec numbers along with items identified on drawings, i.e. 12, 35, 00, casework. Our purpose, to link item in drawing to the specification. What is your opinion on this practice?
Well, when I worked as an architect, we tried to do some of that type of keynoting, and we discussed it a lot. And when I encounter it on architects' drawings, which is rarely, I hate it. I'm familiar with the numbers, but most people aren't. General contractors really aren't. Subcontractors are, but then they have to go searching through everything, every number. It's easier to read written words than to find a number and then go look somewhere else for the information that you need. There's also a huge chance that the person who's drawing it will make a mistake with the number or will change something, forget to change the number. It won't be immediately recognizable because it's a number, not words. So it just increases the potential for error. So I'm not a fan of keynoting like that. But that's a personal opinion.
Mm-hmm. Well, we are going inside the mind of a specifier today, Liz, so it's going to be personal opinions.
That's right.
And our very good friend David Vaughn has posted a question to you. Liz, you mentioned a minute ago, do not go in with your salesman cap on. Can you talk to the difference in your perception of a salesperson's hat when it's on and when it's off, and why it makes a difference?
Yes. If you go in to meet with an architect, let's use architects because I'm pretty tolerant, but I had a rep come in and meet with me, and he was telling me about a product that his company makes, and I said, that's something I would never recommend to an architect client of mine. You might want to go look in the direction of developers or owners if you're going to try to promote this product. And then he met with a client of mine and actually promoted the product to an architect, a design-oriented architect. So don't try to promote products that are not appropriate for the project. So if the architect's project is pretty far along in construction documents, decisions have been made, lots and lots of design decisions have been made, and you're called in to talk about one aspect of the project on which your product is specified and the architect is drawing details and needs some technical help, don't look around at the rest of the drawing and say, hey, you could use this other product of mine right here, unless there's actually something wrong with the way that what's intended on the architectural drawings is portrayed. So unless there's a problem with a solution that you can offer, don't bring up other parts of the architect's project, because that will feel a little bit invasive at that point. Now, if you're in an architect's office doing a lunch presentation, you want to, and they want to, know all about your entire product line. I want to know all about your entire product line, even if I have a specific question that you and I are meeting in person about. But an architect that you're meeting in person with for a technical issue near the end of construction documents phase, that architect does not want to know about your entire product line. So that's the salesman hat versus the technical representative hat.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
To tell you the truth, Liz, the questions are stacking up. Do you want to go on and come back to questions in a minute?
Oh, yeah, maybe I'll speed up a little bit. And
your call. Yes.
Okay. So when you are doing a group presentation, such as a box lunch at an architect's firm, use the presentation as an opportunity to show the technical knowledge that you have as it relates to your products. So climate zones and building codes and assemblies. And encourage questions. And mention other things that the architect should consider, such as where your product meets somebody else's product or some other kind of building assembly. This gets back to the salesman hat. Don't push products or lines that are not likely to appeal to your specific audience. So design-oriented firms don't want products that pretend to be other things. They don't generally like things that look like wood but that aren't wood, for example. And firms that do projects with lower budgets, such as one of my clients who does a lot of retail, they don't need information about luxury products like marble for countertops, because they're doing retail strip malls and things like that. And then, of course, put your salesman hat back on and make sure everyone has your contact information so that they'll call you when they need you. When I meet one-on-one with somebody, I want to know everything. So if you can just do a general overview and then I'll ask specific questions, that's good. And don't be afraid to try to set up a one-on-one meeting with a specifier, because most of us are willing and happy to meet with you. But always set an appointment. A lot of us work strange hours. Many people work from their homes. So you need to not just drop in. You need to set an appointment with a beginning and an end time. And as I mentioned earlier, I don't need AIA continuing education credits, so you don't need to do an AIA presentation for me in a one-on-one meeting. And most specifiers are in the same boat. So maybe we could take a few more questions, Joy?
Yes, because heaven knows you have them.
Okay.
Coming in from Twitter. Let's see. My Travis rep asks, can you please ask her What impact do interior designer consultants have in the buying or spec decision? How much do you listen to those people anyway?
Well, here's the funny thing. The architect is the buffer between me and the interior designer. So if that's a good thing. That's a really good thing, because sometimes I feel like the interior designer and I are looking at the same exact information and we're coming up with exact opposite answers. The interior designers look at more at aesthetics, and I look more at performance. But the interior designers are the people with the pretty things that they show to the owner. So the interior designer makes selections, 3 different groups of different interior finishes. This is scheme A, scheme B, scheme C, and then they show it to the owner, and the owner picks one. And then that's the Bible. That's what's getting in the project. So, and some firms will let that be a more hard and fast budget item than other things. They'll value engineer exterior assemblies in order to keep the interior products that the owner signed off on. So a pretty big impact.
Yeah, I'm beginning to think I should have an interior designer on for one of these presentations.
Ooh, good idea. A CSI member interior designer, though.
Well, of course, and that brings us to another question. How important is it to you to see CDT or CCPR after someone's name? Those refer to CSI certifications program, the construction document technologist, and the certified construction product representative.
I love it because if someone has the CDT certification or certificate, CDT certificate, then I know that we at least have a common foundation. So when I took the CDT exam, it was before I started writing specs, but it was after I was already a licensed architect, and I'd already done a lot of construction contract administration, and I thought I was, where I was supposed to be. But then I took the CDT exam, and I learned so much. Pieces fell into place. I had these gaps in my experience that I didn't realize I had, or I didn't realize how to fill until I took the CDT exam. So I'm thrilled when I see a product rep with CDT on the business card, because I know that we're starting from the same place regarding understanding the roles and responsibilities of different people in the construction process. And CCPR, that's wonderful. To me it means that someone is really taking the career seriously and trying to improve, always improve, and educate him or herself further.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. As an employee of CSI, I'm supposed to say that, but it's better coming from someone who isn't paid to.
Yeah.
Although I agree with you entirely. I'm CDT, CCPR myself, and it made a huge difference for me. If nothing else, I began to get the jokes.
Yeah.
Now, here's one of our favorite kind of questions, and I wondered if you were going to get to this. Proprietary versus non-proprietary specs, and what should a rep do to help or at least to not offend?
To help or at least to not what?
Offend.
Offend. Okay. Let's see. That's good. Let me see. That might get right into my next topic. No, it doesn't. Sorry.
Do you want to come back to that later?
Let's do it right now.
Okay.
You can help make project specifications better. So proprietary specifications can be open or closed. Okay? Proprietary just means that a manufacturer's product is listed. And you can have a proprietary spec with 3 specific products listed. But the way that most people use the term means closed spec. When most people say proprietary spec, they mean closed proprietary spec, where there's only one product that's acceptable to the owner or to the architect, and no substitutions are allowed. Or maybe substitutions are allowed. This gets very complicated. But I think that what the question is getting at is, what should a product representative do if the project specification is a closed proprietary spec, no substitutions? So that's the question I'm going to try to answer. It would be good for you to not press on this project. The project that you see is a closed proprietary spec, unless you see that something is terribly wrong with this selection. It's an inappropriate product for the project. You need to tread carefully, but I recommend that you call the architect first. Or if you know the specifier who did the project, call the specifier and find out why it's a closed proprietary spec. And chances are the specifier will tell you that it's because that's what the architect wanted or that's what the owner wanted. I personally always try to foster competitive bidding among true comparable products. So I don't like to write closed proprietary specs. But start with the architect, find out why it's closed proprietary, and see if there are misconceptions about your product, misconceptions about other manufacturers' products. If it's the owner who required this closed proprietary spec, then I don't know what to tell you. I know that some school districts in Colorado require tunemic coatings only for all structural steel and even metals such as handrails on the outside of a building. And they say no substitutions. They say this right in their tech spec, in their technical requirements. So obviously somebody got to the school district. Tunemic is a great product, and I specify it, but I don't specify it as closed proprietary spec unless that comes from the owner or the architect, or sometimes it comes from the structural engineer regarding structural steel. So if it's coming from the owner, I don't know how to help you. But if it's coming from the architect, you can request a meeting and don't say, hey, I saw your project spec for this and you should consider my product. Say, I represent a product line of, let's use paint because I've used the tunemic example before. I represent a product line of paints, and I'd like to educate you about my manufacturer's high-performance coatings line. So if you use as a starting point for your meeting this project specification on which the architect required a closed proprietary spec, I just don't think you're going to get in the door, or you're going to create some bad feelings. We hate to be criticized. All humans hate criticism, and specifiers take a lot of it, and unfortunately we give a lot of it. We try to do it tactfully because that's what's best for the project. But just try not to hurt anyone's feelings.
Okay, are you going to move on, or are you going to take questions?
Why don't I move on to this thing about project specifications and then take questions?
And while you're doing that, for the folks, I'm going to hang around, and I'm sure Liz will too, for a couple of minutes after the webinar is up at the hour and take a few more questions, and then questions that aren't answered or that might be better asked to a larger audience, I'll put in CSI's LinkedIn group and let a lot of our specifiers comment.
All right. So even if I am specifying only one acceptable product and have a manufacturer's guide spec in my hand for that product, I start from my own master, which is the master spec masters. And what I do with the guide spec is I line it up next to my master spec and I pull information out of the guide spec and put it into my spec where it belongs. This can address issues with poorly formatted guide specs, but also it helps me make sure I'm not missing anything that I know master spec has covered that the guide spec may not have. And I read the entire guide spec so that I know if there's something that master spec is missing that the guide spec has in it, I'll put that into my project specification too. So I don't take your guide spec as is and pop it into my project manual. Some people might, but most full-time specifiers wouldn't do that. So my goal is always to foster competitive bidding among true equivalents. I like to write a tight spec that allows competition, but that does not allow substitution of products that are not true equivalents. And then I do my best to help architects enforce that spec. And one thing about manufacturer guide specs is don't put things in your guide spec that don't affect performance and don't add value to the owner, but do lock out your competitors, because I hate it when I find out that I copied something like that and put it into my project spec without meaning to lock out these other manufacturers, and then I did for no good reason. So I figure it out. I feel duped. I don't like it when people make me feel duped. So if there's something that needs to be in your guide spec because it's a true performance matter, then put it in. Otherwise, don't put it in if it doesn't have much function. One great way for you to help with project specifications is to review the spec section after the specifier has completed or nearly completed the section. And I've had representatives review my spec section and make additions and deletions in the Word document and just track changes, or note it up with a red pen. And then, call me on the phone or email me and say, I added this because, I deleted this because, I changed this because. This is really, really helpful, and I've learned a lot from the product representatives who have helped me in this way. Let's take another couple of questions.
Well, we have one of my favorites here. Is there a polite way to let a specifier know that the product they have specified has not been manufactured for years?
Ooh, that's a good one. I love that one. Yes. I'm trying to figure out how I can tell a school district the same thing. And I haven't figured out how to do it, so I've given up. But yes, just send an email and say, you might want to update your master. and explain that we replaced this product with, the new one in 1984 or whatever. Because I've done this to civil engineers. I've mentioned, okay, this company manufactures this product, but it is not a waterproofing product. It is a different product, and they haven't had a waterproofing product with this name in at least 20 years. So you need to look into where you're getting your information. Yeah, so I know it happens a lot. Just be polite, but be very technical. Just give them all the information. I would just say, what I just said to the civil engineer. I called the manufacturer, or you could say I am the manufacturer. I work for the manufacturer, and this product was replaced with this product in 1984.
And it also helps if you can point out that something is perhaps not up to code, I believe. I've heard Lori Green talk about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
That's
usually
a
helps.
big one.
Now, we do have another question here about interaction with specifiers. Does a product rep reviewing your specs for a certain section help, or is it just a pain in the, and we'll use the term but, and not needed?
Oh, it helps tremendously. It helps tremendously. Now, remember that the specifier has, already spent some time on this and thinks it's good, or else wouldn't be sending it to you, because we're particularly sensitive to criticism, right? We're perfectionists for the most part. So we think we've done it right. So tread carefully with things that are just really bad, but it really helps when you can change the wording of something that is not clear or is not correct, add specific product names in where I might not have done that. For example, different parts of an assembly, like with stucco, there's the, my spec might just say reinforcing mesh, whereas a manufacturer's proprietary system might have the specific kind of reinforcing mesh called out, and you might point out, well, and actually you're going to need a different reinforcing mesh at windowsills than you use in other places if you're reinforcing this. So no, it's a tremendous help, but what's most helpful is if you can write down the comments. You can write them down right on the spec section, send it back with an email that explains the comments. It's really helpful.
Okay. Do you want to take another? We are almost at the hour.
Okay, let's wrap this up quickly and then see what time we have for questions.
And then we'll hang around and take some questions.
Yes.
Because heaven knows you've got a list here. Yes.
Okay. So, as I mentioned in the beginning, I used to work at a small design-oriented architecture firm. You can't tell by firm names if they're design-oriented or technically oriented, but you might be able to tell by the pictures on the wall in the office. And it's what architecture school students are pushed towards. They're not pushed towards firms that do retail and big box work and draw every single wall section. They're pushed towards firms who push the design envelope. So architecture school is about design and theory, and the way that our profession is set up, architecture school graduates are supposed to learn everything practical on the job. So interns look up to their bosses as mentors. And if a boss is dismissive of product reps or disrespectful or thinks that they're only there to bring them lunch, then emerging professionals, young architects, intern architects, are likely to have the same attitude. And it's embarrassing to me to have to admit that I didn't understand how important product representatives are to my work or to architecture and construction until I started writing specs. And now I take many opportunities to explain how important product reps are and how they can be great technical resources for architects. So, to wrap up, the project has the owner team, and the design team, and the contractor team. And the specifier is part of the design team. Product reps sell products to contractors, so they're part of the contractor team. But we all have the same goal, which is to get a building built for an owner and to make a living doing it. So we're all in this together. So we might have time for one more question. Or Joy, you could talk about these things coming up.
You make it sound so attractive. But I do have to comment on this. Our next free webinar will be next month on March 21st, and we will have a group who attended CSI's Master Specifiers Retreat talk about that experience. The Master Specifiers Retreat is where CSI brings together a group of high-level building product manufacturers with a group of high-level specifiers to have conversations and have some education. And Liz, you've gone to that, haven't you?
Yes, I went to the first one. It was wonderful.
Yeah, they're pretty cool. They usually don't invite me because it really is high level. And then you can also sign up for the bulletin to get the emails about this by emailing us at marketing@csicinet.org. And what I'm really happy to report is that on May 16th we will hold the first Trusted Advisors Workshop. Registration is now open for that, and the lovely Liz O'Sullivan, who you have been listening to today, has agreed to come over and spend the day with us at that, haven't you, Liz?
Yes, I'll be there.
And perhaps we will just put a rope up around you and let people ask you questions over a rope. That's where things are going. Now, actually, we are going to talk about integrity. We are going to talk about trust. We are going to talk about how to manage a network, how to build a network that will keep the pipeline full, and lots of other stuff. So please go to csicinet.org/trustedadvisors to learn more about that, and consider joining us for a day in Denver. Now, having said that, do you want to take some questions, Liz?
Sure.
Okay. And I will say that Mitch Miller is full of commentary this afternoon.
Oh.
I think he agrees with you strongly on everything. But here's a question.
Great.
We've gotten a couple variations of this. If you don't get continuing education through Lunch and Learns, where do you prefer to get those required credits?
Oh, me personally?
Yeah, you. Well, they're not asking me. Yeah.
I just end up with them. They just come to me. No, I go to my monthly CSI chapter meetings, and most of those lunch presentations have continuing education credits. I go to the AIA Building and Closure Council, I think it's the Colorado BEC meetings, and those have continuing education credits. I end up with a lot from the CSI convention, Construct, because I fill every available class time with a class, so I get a bunch of hours there. And then every 2 years, I have to get 30 hours of lead continuing education. And so that's a lot, and that's the main reason that I have, 60 hours extra every year.
Wow. Well, we can at least say you're educated. You're up to date on things.
Yeah.
Now, here is a question I have never heard before. Regarding non-product-oriented specs, what, if any, responsibility does the specifier have for determining software or cloud-based services that can help a project owner realize more long-term value from the submittal and closeout documentation generated during the construction phase of the project? That sounds to me like, can you make them use some variation of BIM?
Right. Or like a project software for managing a project. I would never specify something unless the owner told me to. Something like that. So that's got to come from the owner. If the question was about BIM, then obviously that needs to come from the owner, because the architect or specifier could never impose that requirement because it adds cost to the project, or should never impose that requirement without talking to the owner, because it adds cost to the construction of the project that the owner pays for. So unless the owner wants it and is aware of the cost, it shouldn't be in the specifications as a requirement. Now, if it's project management software, same thing. That's it's a great thing to have, but that needs to come from the owner because of the cost that it adds to the project.
Okay, here's another. With the growth of the use of the internet, less in-house product binders, and less attention to a typical product update email, what is the best way for product reps to stay in front and in the mind of the specifier? How do you keep track of all those relationships you form at events, Liz?
Oh, there are some great ways to do this. That's a really good question, actually. And I have a really good answer. So I am on Twitter at Liz O'Sullivan AIA, and a lot of the people that I interact with most on Twitter are CSI members, a lot of whom are product representatives, a lot of whom do not live in Denver. Most of my tweets are CSI people, and they're from outside of Denver. But most of them I've met in person at CSI conventions and other events. So when I have issues with door hardware, like the contractor on a project or the owner on a project is requiring the architect to communicate with this one particular door hardware rep, and that person either really isn't a rep or doesn't really know what a spec is or whatever, the first person I think of is John Daines. Now, he's with Asa Abloy, and so I'm like, well, I need to talk to John and figure out who this architect should be communicating with on their next project. They'll tell the contractor who they want to work with in whatever state. This particular client of mine works in random states, mostly like Indiana, Illinois, Pennsylvania, that kind of area. So, and then the second person I thought of was Debbie Stewart, because I ran into her at my CSI chapter meeting the other day. So, Debbie was the second person I ran into because CSI chapter meetings happen once a month, but Twitter happens most days. And John Daines is out there on Twitter every day. So I think of him, right? And so it's CSI chapter meetings. AIA, if you're involved in AIA, for some reason the AIA BEC meetings, Building Envelope Commission, that's not the right word. I forget the right term. Half of the people who go to these meetings are product representatives. I wish more architects went. I'm so thrilled all the product reps are there. I wish we had a bigger room and had more architects too. So go to industry events and get online. Get on Twitter, get on LinkedIn, and use it. That's a great way to market yourself. Just be in front of people all the time online.
Now, Liz, do you remember at the beginning of the hour when you were talking about when you get to decide and when other people decide and interior versus exterior?
Yeah.
Okay. Who typically chooses low slope roofing? Is flat roofing considered visible?
Huh. Oh boy, that's a great issue. I pick manufacturers for that. My clients will say EPDM roofing or more and more lately TPO roofing, and then I just select manufacturers. I'm not a roofing expert, so I don't get into discussions with them about roofing systems. Sometimes for owner-occupied buildings, I think maybe I should. Actually, I have before recommended one single-ply type of roof over another for an owner-occupied building because I think it might last longer, but that's something that I hesitate to step out on a limb about. But I select manufacturers for single-ply roofing. Sometimes the owner does. Some owners have requirements, but the architect almost never has a requirement for a manufacturer for a single-ply roof. So I'm usually the person who does that.
Now, here's a question, and I'd like to hear your opinion, actually. I really would. Do most architect offices have spec writers in-house, or should I be trying to develop relationships with specifying consultant firms? And I would tack on to that, Liz, is this something that's shifted over time?
Oh, that's a good question. Now, I've only been writing specs for 6 years. So, and in my experience at a small firm in Denver, everybody was out of house. I had no idea that some firms had specifiers in-house. I really didn't. My experience with specifiers was very limited until I started working with one on a project. So more and more lately, when firms are having economic trouble, they're laying off the people with the most technical knowledge and experience and hanging on to the people who are the best at bringing work in into architecture firms. So in previous recessions this did not happen, but in this latest recession I know a lot of specifiers were laid off from the architecture firms where they were working. And of course they just started their own firms and they're fine because there's a need for specifications. The building departments require it, insurers and lenders often require it. So I think that more and more people are ending up independent than in-house. One thing about trying to meet with somebody in-house is that there's kind of a gauntlet that you may have to run through. I'm not sure. There are gatekeepers at the telephone and things like that. There might be a separate scheduler. So your time might be better spent trying to meet with all the independents first, and then after you've already done that, then you try to get in with the firms. Of course, the biggest firms have in-house specifiers, and they do some of the best work. So that's where, if you do get in and get to know an in-house specifier, that's where that can really pay off, because these firms have often better projects.
We've got an interesting question here, and again, I'd like to hear your opinion. We offer a welded steel I-beam which is used as an alternative to ganged up cold form sections in column applications. Because we are not known to many, I often ask to be specified as an alternative so the GC owner can price our product and, if competitive, move forward. Is asking to be put in as an alternative a good idea?
Yes, it is a good idea. Unfortunately, it's complicated because that product doesn't go in the same spec section as what it's trying to replace. So it's complicated. Some people will just put it in the same spec section. I would stress out about it and put a note in that spec section and then have an additional spec section for this product. But yeah, I think that's a good idea to introduce people to your product, to let them know that it's out there. Now, one thing that a lot of architects do not like to see is bidder alternatives. So, you know, really it would have to be, ideally you would get in with the architect and say, you know, this is something, or a general contractor who's doing a construction management general contractor project, a design or a negotiated contract. Then the general contractor could introduce that to the architect, who would then get it properly written into the specification.
Now, do you want an easy one?
Sure.
Is cold calling a spec writer a no-no?
No. Well, cold calling on the telephone? No,
I assume.
that's not. That's not a no-no. That's totally fine.
So how do you feel about that?
It's fine. I prefer emails, but I do not mind phone calls. I don't always answer my phone, you know. I generally call back if you've left a message. Do not just show up at my office because I'm a really busy person, and when I'm at my office, I'm working. I have kids and I help with my husband's business, and so when I'm at my office, I am just working. If I'm going to have a meeting, I prefer that it's scheduled. So don't drop in on me. Now, other specifiers probably feel the same, but the telephone is fine. In my opinion, the telephone is fine. Cold calling is fine on the telephone.
Oh, here's a good one. You ready?
Yep.
Since master spec sections are not updated annually, how do you check the currency of their documents before using them on a project?
Oh, that's a really good question. I do try to check every product before I issue the specs. So, and also I try to, when I have time, I email ARCOM and say, hey, this product has been replaced, or hey, this thing is wrong in this section. And I've only done that a few times because sometimes when I notice it, it's near a deadline and, you know, it's not a priority to email ARCOM. But I do go to the manufacturer's website and check on the products, make sure they're still there before I issue.
Now, is it appropriate to approach an architect for a project in design development phase that is a fit for the scope of work? If so, what is the best way?
Just call them and try to set up a meeting, or email them and try to set up a meeting, or call their gatekeeper, the receptionist, try to set up a lunch presentation, something like that. It's hard. And when I was working as an architect, I didn't understand why people wanted to meet with me. It felt like it was sales, which it was. So even though I regret the dynamic of the free lunch, I really feel like that is the best way for you to introduce yourself to an architecture firm. So that's how I would try to get into an architecture firm, to introduce them to your product. I mean, I've done it. I've done it for clients. I've bought them lunch and given presentations on how we can work better together. You know, and I did it at lunchtime because everyone needs to eat, and sometimes you can get people to eat places other than their desk. So, that's how I would approach that, and I wouldn't mention the project in design development until you're already there. You know, just do an AIA presentation and say somewhere in the middle, not at the end, not at the beginning, but somewhere, I heard about this project that you're working on, and have you considered, you know, if you're already familiar with this project or with my product, have you considered using it on this project?
Okay, do you want to take a couple more, or shall we say we're going to post these in LinkedIn, because I know we're eating into your time.
Yeah, no, I can take, why don't we do two more and then sign off?
Okay, well, here's one. How do you suggest the product rep obtain a notice when their product is specified prior to the construction bid?
Oh, I don't know.
In theory, he would have been paying attention to what was going on with
I
that,
have no
with that
idea.
specifier, but he won't see it until it's in the documents that go out for bid, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, when I have a question for a rep and I email or call that rep, I tell them what project it is, or at least I say, you know, it's a church in Indiana. So, you know, that's kind of a lead, sort of, but that's only because I've only started recently to realize that that's really important for product reps. So, you know, I try to do that when I have a specific question, but other than that, I mean, you can ask the architect or the specifier, hey, let me know if you spec my product, but you know, I don't know how you would get a notice of everything that's specified. I certainly am not going to notify everybody. I mean, that's not in my fee. That's not what the owner is indirectly paying me for, you know.
Well, I want you to know that Mitch Miller continues to emphatically agree with you, and we may make him start taking typed questions in the future.
Oh, that's awesome. That's a great idea.
Maybe that's what we'll do with Mitch. I work for an exterior siding manufacturer that was recently sold to another company. Is there an easy way to get the new company's name into the master specs, or does it happen firm by firm?
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would contact ARCOM and BSD and let them know. And other than that, yeah, it's going to happen firm by firm. But if you have, you know, a contact list, you can send everyone an email, you know, a flyer. Hey, we've changed our name. Same company, new name, you know.
I do. Yeah, and now Mitch's fans are telling me that we should let him talk next time, so I think we are going to recruit Mitch for a webinar.
Excellent.
Yes, because apparently he has a fan base. He'll be delighted to know that.
I didn't know about the fan base.
Well, I'm sure you do too after today, Liz. I really appreciate your doing this. Thank you.
Sure.
And we'll see you in May.
All right.
Yeah. Okay. So shall we call it?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. We're going to go ahead and shut down the webinar, but we appreciate your attention. And again, Liz, we really appreciate your help today and answering all those crazy questions while trying to make a point about how you think.
Sure.